The voice on the air, the host said. Daniel Reed is with us tonight, and Emma's mug slid from her fingers, striking ceramic against the kitchen tile. Betrayal burned through her before she could place the sound. She blinked hard and reached for the radio knob with a hand that would not steady. The broadcast voice carried the same low cadence she had learned to interpret over years of quiet mornings and cramped car rides. Emma stood breath-hitching and heard words she had not expected to hear, words about regret and absence. The central problem was immediate. The man who had walked out of her life was on the air explaining himself to the city, and Emma felt compelled to answer. She moved down the narrow apartment hallway, feet whispering over the runner, and the living room light left streaks on the framed photograph of their wedding day that sat face down on a bookshelf. That photograph had been wrapped in a dish towel since the divorce papers. She did not plan to see it again. Emma's hands tightened on the radio as the host introduced the segment, and Daniel's voice talked about a single night and a choice he could not undo. Emma called the number listed on the bottom of the radio station screen with thumbs that trembled. When Marco answered, his voice came through measured and warm. Marco. Emma, wait, slow down, where are you? Marco's voice held the producer's calm, quick assessment, protective edge. Emma pressed her lips together, feeling the old recoil of fear and the blunt aftertaste of betrayal. He's on the show. Daniel's on the show. I need to talk to him. Emma, breathe. Don't go on air without me. Marco's tone put a gentle barrier between her and the booth. She pushed past the thought and dialed anyway. The station answered live. A brief, registered beep meant the line could be patched. Marco. Emma, listen. Stay where you are. Let me find out who the guest is. His hand in the voice felt like a palm at her back, steady and careful. Within minutes she was in the elevator, one of her worn coats wrapped tight against the cold. She left the apartment lights off. The building's stairwell felt colder against her forearms than the October night. On the street she walked faster than she meant to, each step a little shout of urgency. She saw Taxis and a couple arguing on a sidewalk bench, everything ordinary and separate from the rawness she carried. At the station entrance, Marco met her in the lobby, headphones looped around his neck and a clipboard in his hand. Marco's posture was the same, a producer's straight back, a man who listened before he spoke. He looked at Emma's face and the word worry folded into his features. Emma, Marco, we can't put you on live without a delay. He might, he says he's explaining why he left. Emma interrupted. I deserve to hear that explanation. She kept her voice level, but it trembled with emotion that Marco noticed in a single glance. Marco stepped between her and the studio door. I'll handle it. Give me a minute. Sit in the control room. Do not go in. Emma forced a nod. The control room smelled of warm electronics and burnt coffee. Consoles glowed with small red lights. Through the glass she could see the doll's house world of the on-air booth. Microphone lamp, the round window that made people appear smaller than they were. Daniel was there, backlit enough to make his profile a silhouette, his hand on the script. He sounded thin over the glass when he spoke, but the resonance in his voice traveled down to the control room in a way that pressed against Emma's ribs. Marco moved quickly, fingers on the board. He whispered into his headset, we need a slight delay. Patch her in if it's appropriate, but don't let the feed run without us knowing. Emma's chest tightened. Betrayal expanded and then folded into a new pulse of confusion. For months she had lived by rules. Small coffee at 9, mail sorted on Tuesdays, the ring pushed into the jewelry box in a drawer. Those rules fell away in the face of his voice. But she also wanted to protect herself from humiliation. Marco's caution felt like a lifeline. The host introduced a caller taking a question and answer slot. Daniel's voice softened in that practiced way radio hosts learn when they try to appear honest. I left because I thought it would keep her safe, he said. I thought my choices were going to drag trouble to her door. The phrase landed like a cold stone in Emma's stomach. She had assembled a dozen theories for his departure over the years, work abroad, wariness, anger, but this explanation shifted what she had believed. Marco leaned in and mouthed, don't go in yet. He hit a switch to engage the station's delay. Emma stood in the dim control room and pressed one hand to the glass, the cool surface imprinting her palm. The gesture was simple. She needed to contact the man whose voice still filled the room. She pressed the handset to her ear when Marco put it within reach. The line carried a thin, static, flecked version of life from the booth. Daniel's voice paused as if aware of the phone. The host said, we have a caller, go ahead. A second later, Daniel's voice was nearer, threaded with a distant accent of regret. Emma's first words were short. Daniel, her name on his tongue made something creak in her bones. Daniel, Emma, he paused. I didn't expect you to be here. Why didn't you tell me this then? Emma's voice rose, not high but clear. The word why carried her demand for reason, for confession, for the explanation that might let her stop thinking of him as the man who walked away. Daniel's measurement came back in measured pauses, because I thought silence would do less damage. Because I was afraid I'd bring the people who were following me to you. Emma's reaction shifted again. Confusion became anger. She felt a sting along her jaw, the reflex to clench. Daniel, you left without a note. You left our home with the baby monitor still plugged in. You left me with questions and bills and nights where I couldn't sleep. How was that protection? She listed sharp, specific things. She anchored her anger in precise failures. On the other side of the glass, the host leaned forward. Marco's hand hovered over the console, voices layered. Host Daniel, the city's background noise filtered through open mics. The live audience could be listening, and the thought of a public unspooling of private life made Emma's mouth taste like copper. Daniel replied, and his answer induced a twist. I thought the trouble was legal, my brother's debt. I thought if I was gone, no one would find you. I was wrong about what would happen. I thought I'd fix it and come back, he the words with a voice that carried the weight of a man still surprised by his own decisions. This confession changed what Emma had assumed. It was not that he had grown cold. It was that he had made a decision to remove himself, believing distance could act like armor. Marco moved, quick and steady. Daniel, we have someone here who needs to, he started, and then he stopped because Daniel interrupted, refusing to be silenced. The studio light cut across Daniel's cheek and caught the grey at his temple. Emma felt sudden vulnerability. Her anger thinned into a painful curiosity. She stepped forward to the glass and saw the faint 5 o'clock shadow on Daniel's jaw, the lines at his eyes that had not been there during their happier years. She remembered the way he used to fold laundry and the exact tilt of his head when he tried to understand a child's fever. Those memories not as abstract images but as concrete actions she could name. Emma, please, Daniel into the microphone, and his voice made that single word a plea she could physically measure. I need you to hear what I did. Not for pity, for context, for the truth. The host glanced at Marco, and Marco looked at Emma with the producer's calculation. Marco swallowed and said, Emma, this will go live unless we cut her. You sure you want to? Emma's hands were clumsy on the handset. Marco's caution reactivated her protective instinct. She did not want the city to catalogue her grief. The emotion shifted again, confusion to guardedness. Yet the prospect of never knowing felt worse than the danger of public revelation. She signaled Marco with a quick nod. Marco cleared his throat and pulled back the delay just enough to let a taped segment through while still holding a buffer. He keyed a station cue. On air, Daniel began to tell the sequence of a night. The man from his brother's debts appearing at his workplace, a late argument, a pasta dinner burned and thrown away, a slammed door. He detailed concrete small things, how he shoved a stack of unpaid invoices into a desk drawer, how he refused a ride, how he told himself he would return with solutions. Those specific images altered the frame. Daniel's departure was not a romantic abandonment, but a choice made in panic and fear. Emma listened to the details like a logician passing facts. Each small action Daniel described redirected the lines she had drawn in her mind since he left. The city sounds outside the window, occasional traffic, a distant siren kept the night anchored to reality. When Daniel his name into the microphone, he hesitated. I couldn't tell Emma because I was ashamed. I lied to myself that I could handle it alone. The admission exposed a motive rather than excuse. Emma's next emotion shifted from guardedness to a fragile willingness to understand. She felt the tightness around her throat loosen by a fraction. Marco leaned low and spoke with professional bluntness. Daniel, are you saying you left to keep her away from your brother's problems? The question held accusation and curiosity at once. Daniel answered with short lines. Yes, Marco, I thought distance would stop the exposure. I was wrong. A new external event interrupted. The host turned to a caller in the live feed and read a listener's message aloud, someone who remembered Emma and Daniel's wedding years ago. The station played a short clip of the wedding song. Hearing that song pulled a physical reaction from Emma. Her hand moved to her throat, fingers mapping the scar on her eyebrow without thinking. That small human gesture counted as evidence of pain laid on a body. Marco's fingers found a mute button and hovered, then released it. He met Emma's eyes and said, You can go in. You can stand at the doorway if you want. I'll keep it contained. He offered choice rather than demand. Emma walked to the doorway and paused with one hand on the frame. The studio lamp hallowed Daniel's hair as he rose from the chair. He walked toward the glass with a slow, uncertain gait. When the studio door opened, the on-air host's hands fluttered in a showman's way and the microphone lights blurred into a line of small suns. Daniel stepped out and looked directly at Emma for the first time since the recording began. The control room's air changed because everyone present understood the difference between speaking behind glass and standing beside the person you had once shared a bed with. Emma, he said, and the name arrived shaped by guilt and explanation. I left because I thought it would stop more people from getting hurt. I didn't know how much my silence would hurt you instead. Emma's jaw tightened. Her voice came in short statements that sounded like a list. Daniel, you took the car keys and never left a note. You took our dog's collar and left its bowl full. You left me with a mortgage payment and a basket of unpaid prescriptions. How is that protection? Their exchange became brisk and exposed. Marco watched the meters but let the room hold the moment. The argument contained rapid back and forth lines, 3 to 6 exchanges that landed like staccato punches. Daniel, why didn't you call? Emma demanded. I couldn't. People were watching me. I thought silence would blur my trail. Daniel replied, blur your trail. Emma snapped. You erased us. I thought I'd be back before you realized what happened. Daniel's voice tightened back. You expected me to wait. Emma, I thought you'd be safer if I left. Daniel, each line tightened a knot in Emma's throat and in her decision-making. The exchange contained accusation, defense, and the small human record of two people trying to map a night from memory. Marco's presence kept things formal. He did not let the moment slide into spectacle. The twist that reframed things arrived when Daniel produced a small envelope and held it half visible in his hand. He set it on the console as if the paper itself contained an account ledger. I left a letter with my lawyer for when I could not reach you, he said. It lists payments I arranged and the name of the person who pressured me. I did not want you near him. I was protecting you by planning ahead. Emma moved forward until the glass felt warm from their combined presence. The idea that he had arranged payments and left paper trails introduced a new understanding of his absence. It was not a simple act of cowardice, but a messy attempt at responsibility gone wrong. This twist changed the earlier idea that he had simply abandoned them out of selfishness. Marco reached for the envelope and read a portion aloud to be sure. The accountant's name, a payment schedule, notarized affidavit. The words were concrete. Dates, sums, bank names. Hearing those details altered the direction of the confrontation. Betrayal softened into a mix of anger and something like respect for the effort, though it did not erase the hurt. Daniel's next move forced a small, public reckoning. He stepped closer to Emma and said, I kept a ring in my pocket. I couldn't give it back then because I thought silence was safer. It's in my jacket now. He unbuttoned his coat and touched the silver ring at his finger, the thin band that matched the one she hid in her drawer. Emma's fingers found her own hand and went for the small pendant she always touched when she was uncertain. The action expressed more than any sentence could. She was still someone who worked by small rituals. The last external event of the chapter arrived as the broadcast producer counted down an ad break. Marco used that slot to pull the live meter into delay and to shepherd listeners away from the raw exchange. He guided the team with a quick, efficient set of commands. We have a break in 30 seconds. Daniel, do you want to step out and speak with Emma privately? He asked. Daniel looked at Emma with an expression that mixed hope and shame. Yes, please. He backed away from the mic and extended his hand in a gesture that had been awkward and human since the beginning. Emma hesitated for a heartbeat and then accepted. She put a palm in his and felt the slight callus at the base of his thumb. The contact was small but concrete. It did not resolve everything. It changed the question from whether he had been selfish to what he intended to do next. Outside the station, the fog pooled under the streetlight in a narrow ring. Marco walked beside Emma as she stepped into the night, protective and steady. She pulled her coat tighter and then paused on the curb. Her fingers fumbled at the jewelry box in her inner pocket before she drew out the worn silver wedding band. She held the ring in her palm for a beat and then slid it along her thumb until it came free. The action was not ceremonial. It was a decision translated into a single physical move. She placed the band on a concrete wall beside the station steps, not far from the mailbox where late-night letters went to be picked up. The band sat on warm concrete, catching the halo of the lamp. Marco did not speak while she did this. He stood a few feet away with his hands in his pockets and watched the movement with the careful attention he gave to on-air transitions. Are you okay, Emma? He asked finally. Emma's voice was a small, flat sound. I don't know yet. She closed her hand and turned away from the ring, leaving the choice of forgiveness unresolved. The chapter closed on a concrete act. She walked away from the station with Marco, leaving the ring resting under the streetlight, the broadcast's recorded audio still warm somewhere inside the station. She had heard his explanation. She had the envelope with dates and names, and she had made a deliberate physical choice about the ring. The night's events had shifted her emotions multiple times: betrayal, confusion, anger, guardedness, a fragile willingness to understand, and each shift had led to an action. By the time they reached the taxi stand, the radio voices were a muffled hum behind them. Marco hailed a cab and opened the door. Emma slid in, closed the door, and looked at the envelope in her coat pocket. She was not healed. She was not convinced. She had a new set of facts to carry into morning light and a ring left on a concrete ledge that would force a decision later. She pressed the envelope to her palm, feeling the ridged paper like a map she might follow. Emma's last thought before sleep came was not an abstract vow. It was a detail. The exact wording Daniel had used when he said, I thought silence would blur my trail. She held that sentence as a piece of evidence she would test. That sentence would shape what she did next, and she would not let silent assumption govern her future actions. Confrontation at the late-night station. Emma shoved through the glass door with the radio handset still coiled in her fingers and said, Who put Daniel on my show? Her voice hit the tiled lobby before her feet did. Betrayal sat behind her sternum and made her hands shake around plastic and metal. She stamped water off her coat and pushed past a sleeping receptionist who blinked awake at the sound. The handset's cord dangled, the little speaker pressed against her palm. Marco met her at the end of the counter, already moving, eyes narrowed. Emma, Marco, you re-soaked. Breathe. Tell me what happened. He held his palms up, slow and open. Suspicion drove her steps. Suspicion kept her chest tight and her jaw hard. She shoved the handset toward him as if it were evidence. The host put his name on the air. Emma, Daniel Reed was with you tonight. He spoke about nose scar and the way I fold napkins. Who did this? Her words came clipped. Each name was a nail. Marco's face changed in a fraction of a second. He set his headphones down and kept one hand on the counter. We can track that. Come with me. He moved before she could think of objection. Within the first minutes, the problem was clear and blunt. The station's live feed carried a voice Emma recognized with the same muscle memory she had used to set a table or soothe a fevered child. The voice belonged to Daniel. The sound folded into every corner of the lobby. It had already reached callers and social feeds. Anger flared inside her, and then a new shift. Doubt. If the voice was Daniel's, had he done this, or was someone using his voice to break her open? They hustled through a corridor lined with cables and posters. A producer reached for a microphone and then stopped when Marco moved faster. We didn't put him on. Marco to the room, pull the patch. Someone find the line. The staff reacted with the business-like energy of people used to emergencies. Hands flew over faders. Emma stood with her wristwatch tapped against her palm until her fingers cramped. A radio host's laugh creaked over a monitor. Tonight's caller says, the feed cut as Marco jammed a finger on a button. Emma kept looking for a silhouette. She headed for the glass booth. She pressed both palms to the cool pane and saw only a dim figure behind the microphone, shoulders hunched beneath the studio lamp. The figure's face was shadowed. The sound of Daniel's voice floated out again through the glass before anyone could mute it permanently. Emma knocked on the glass. Hard, who are you? She yelled. Her voice bounced back like a thrown stone. The booth remained a locked image of distance. Mic pop filter, headset, a bowl of cold coffee. The station staff froze. Marco returned to her side. Can't see their face, they're re in a caller line. We can freeze the feed, but the caller's voice is patched into a pre-recorded bank. Sounds like Daniel, but we need to trace the incoming line. He sounded precise. Urgency steadied his words. A technician burned through call logs and IPs. He names in a clipped rhythm. Line 3 anonymous, line 11 dropped. Incoming from an offshore relay. Emma listened to the syllables like a translation she didn't want to hear. Fear moved through her now. Fear that someone had been listening to details from her home and then used them on air. Who would do that? She demanded, voice small against the flood of equipment noise. We don't know yet, Marco answered, but it wasn't our production patch. We should assume someone is weaponizing his voice to get at you. His eyes found hers. Protective concern tightened his jaw. Emma's mouth went dry. She tried to list who could know the small private things Daniel had said. The list was short. The suspicion shifted again, this time into anger aimed at those she thought had disappeared from her life without explanation. The engineers tracked a call pattern to a feeder line that stitched together clips and live audio. One technician leaned closer to a monitor and said they were replaying Pore, recorded seg mixed with live bits. Someone's feeding this through a call aggregator. It looked staged. He tapped a waveform and the room tilted into sharper focus. That moment was the chapter's small cliffhanger. The waveform showed edits, but one splice had live room tone from Emma's kitchen. Someone had recorded a private moment and threaded it into the broadcast. Emma's breath left her in a single exhale that tasted like metal. Daniel's voice on the air said, Emma, if you hear this, and the feed snagged. The sentence had the cadence of apology, but the content matched nothing the public should know. Marco's hand landed on Emma's shoulder and held. We can freeze the broadcast, he said, but we should not disconnect until we know if the caller is local. You could be in danger if someone is watching you. His steady voice pushed the next choice into focus. Emma's hands tightened on the handset as if it contained a map. They moved through a burst of short decisions. Security sealed the lobby entrance. The host went off air. A producer paged someone with a last name and a number. Each external event snapped into place. A phone ringing, a door opening, boots in the stairwell. The rhythm of the station began to press on her. Behind the studio glass, a staffer said, the caller line is an aggregator. It took clips from various places and layered them. We were tracing the relay. His fingers slid over a touchscreen and a map bloomed. Lines crossed oceans. Emma read the map like it was a betrayal ledger. If it's not Daniel, she said, the word falling into the humming console. Then who chose the things he said? Her voice lost its edge. It turned inward. The emotional current changed. Anger folded into the need for explanation. Marco answered, we find the relay. We find whoever put those clips together. They used him, but that doesn't mean he gave them. He looked at the technician. Keep tracing node by node. Whoever patched that kitchen clip in will show up. Marco's decisions created movement. People obeyed. An engineer announced a trace hold. We have a local ping. It's routing through an unregistered VoIP number in the city, masked but physical. We can get a street address if we escalate. The word address landed like a weight. Emma's pulse thudded. She remembered in a raw, precise way the night in Chapter 1 when the host's announcement had made her mug fall and crack on her kitchen tile. She had felt the sound in her mouth. That evening now lay beside her in the station, evidence and memory folded together. The present attack referenced the same intimate details. Her suspicion hardened into resolve. She needed to know whether Daniel had been used or whether he had lied. A new door opened. Daniel stood in the doorway, dripping rain from his coat, hair plastered to his forehead. The studio light outlined the grain of his jacket and the line of his jaw. He looked older than the voice had suggested. He looked like someone who had been carrying a bruise for years. Emma's first reaction was accusation. Did you do this? She asked. Her sentence came out as a snapped string. Danny held up both hands. No, I would never, Emma. I didn't know. I heard my own voice on the radio and I came. I didn't put it out there. His breaths came short from the run. Rain dripped onto the floor. Marco stepped between them without dramatic flourish. We have a trace on an unregistered number. We were pulling the address. Do not touch the equipment. Daniel, where were you tonight? Marco's voice was direct and authoritative. Daniel's eyes flicked to the control board and then to Emma. I was at a hospital. He said, I got home late. I didn't call any station. I'm not. He stopped. He produced a folded hospital discharge note and handed it to Emma in the small anteroom. The paper was creased at the corners and damp at one edge. Emma read the line about a patient he had visited. The note listed a name she did not recognize and a date 3 nights earlier. The presence of the note changed something. Doubt crept into her suspicion. One emotional shift, anger into doubt. She had sharpened herself for a confrontation. Now the space between accusation and evidence widened. Why wouldn't you tell me? Emma, why leave without an explanation? Her voice broke into 2 shorter sentences. She used his name. Calling him Daniel tightened the conversation into human terms. Daniel's jaw moved. I thought you'd been better off without me knowing. I carried something I couldn't place on paper. I didn't want to draw you into it. I'm sorry. I'm asking you to believe me now. He did not reach for her. He kept his hands visible. Marco watched them and then said, we still have a relay to trace. Someone may be framing him or using him. We need to know who had access to that kitchen clip. He tapped a console and a log scrolled. A producer called out a name. There's an IP bounce. It resolves to a private number. Wait, one of our former interns had a VoIP account. He left last year. He had access to raw tape a short period. The room murmured. Emma's breath hitched, a quick pivot in her feelings. Suspicion moved toward targeted suspicion at a specific person. She remembered a feat of hospitality and access. She remembered who had keys to the studio's rack and who had been careless with logged files. The emotional current altered again, anger sharpened into investigative focus. Marco, pull his access. If someone lifted a tape and mixed clips, we need the time stamps. Emma, are you willing to sit in on the playback? His voice softened at the end. Emma nodded. She handed her handset to a producer and walked into the control room. The room smelled of coffee and heat. She sat at the edge of a rolling chair. Her hands fumbled with the hem of her coat. The movable chair scraped when she shifted. It was a small mechanical sound that kept her, and they played the raw session, clips scrolled with labels, dinner, lullaby, argument, short, named moments. Emma recognized the clip labeled No Scar and felt the same jolt she had felt in her kitchen. A recorded argument between her and Daniel played, one she did not remember being recorded. Her own voice showed up, haggard and precise. Whoever has that file had to be in the room when it happened. Emma, the sentence was an instrument of accusation. The engineer access log shows 2 signs the week the file was created. One belongs to Marco's assistant. The other to that intern who left. He looked at Marco for confirmation. Marco's face closed. He left under awkward circumstances. We thought he'd gone straight. We kept copies. He could assemble a reel. But why now? Marco allowed. A junior tech tapped a keyboard. Look at the edits. They glued live snippets together with recorded lines. The kitchen ambient registers at 2:50, 6 in the morning. That time stamps with an outgoing call on a phone number linked to a shelter across town. The answer brought a new layer. The room leaned forward. Emma stood abruptly. She felt the next external event like a shove. I want names, she said. I want to know who had access to our sessions and who called that shelter. If someone used Daniel, they chose the most painful parts. Her voice no longer trembled. It was measured. Daniel's expression softened. Emma, I never wanted you to hear me stitched into something meant to hurt you. I would not. He stopped as security entered with a clipboard and a small packet. The packet contained a printed receipt from a payphone. The payphone receipt had a time and a street corner. The corner was 10 blocks from Emma's apartment. The external reveal came quick. Someone had been close enough to record the kitchen's night sound and then fed that into a relay tied to the station that changed the direction of possibility. The twist was specific and ugly. The invasion was local. Emma moved toward the map and tapped the screen at the pin. This is my building's block. I lock my door. Who could have been in my hall? His name. Daniel. Did you send anyone? That question bounced between them. Daniel shook his head. No. If someone came into your building, I would have known. I visit the hospital at odd hours, but not your place. I left you a note. No, I left nothing. I thought silence would protect you, but I see now it invited questions. His voice held a new register, remorse folding into a plea. Marco interjected, we need to check building logs and security cameras. If someone recorded in your kitchen, there might be a delivery man, a neighbor, or a maintenance worker who used a key. Emma, do you still have the broken mug from earlier? He referenced the memory from chapter 1 without repeating its wording. She did. The cracked mug lived in a paper bag. She had carried it out of the kitchen the night the host announced Daniel's name. She had not known then that the mug's fall would become part of the station's evidence trail. She left staff to archive audio while she reached into her coat, pulled out the bag, and placed the mug on the control desk like offering a relic. The mug's chipped rim glinted under fluorescent light. An engineer photographed it and slid the image into a folder labeled Evidence, another external event. A security feed showed a delivery worker entering Emma's lobby on the night the kitchen ambient matched the clip. The man wore a courier jacket and carried a large flat box. He showed a badge. The footage blurred his face, but a tattoo on his wrist was clear. Emma froze. She recognized the wrist tattoo from a neighbor's description. She felt anger rise again, this time anchored and pointed. Name him, she said. They had a name within the hour. The courier's record showed a VoIP number, a temporary account, and a link to the former intern's online handle. It fit into a pattern: access opportunism, then exploitation. The station staff, Marco, and security moved with a procedural rhythm. But nothing about that rhythm answered Emma's oldest question. Why had Daniel left her without explanation? The emotional current shifted one more time, doubt to something quieter, a requirement for answers rather than retribution. They arranged for Daniel to wait outside with a blanket while the station's investigators called the courier's last addresses. Marco stayed with Emma and kept his hand at the small of her back when she slid a finger into her pocket and felt the smooth edge of her hidden wedding band. She rubbed it once, a brief private motion. It was a physical habit that had kept her steady through nights and courtrooms. A young producer returned with a call. We tracked the relay to a storage locker rented under a false name. The manager recognized the intern's voice on tape when we played the clip. The intern reserved the locker 3 months ago. We can open it with a warrant. The sentence landed like a promise. Emma, open it now. The command was simple and legal. It converted vibration into action. They drove to the storage facility in a station minivan. Rain slicked the lot. The manager swiped his clipboard and told them the unit number. Marco and a tech went in with flashlights. Emma stayed in the van with a blanket around her shoulders, hands folded over the handset. When they opened the unit, they found a tangle of hard drives, a battered laptop, a stack of labeled CDs, and several cheap microphones. There were printed out studio logs and sticky notes with time codes. Someone had been meticulous. Emma leaned closer and read a note pinned with a thumbtack. Kitchen ambient 256 and read voice glue. Her breath came shallow. Marco held up a folded photograph. It showed the intern at the station smiling beside a rack of equipment. The intern's name was on the back. Marco read it aloud. He's the one who had access. He used public relays and a rented VoIP to mask the origin. He wanted to make noise. He wanted attention. His voice was flat. The statement left space for Emma to fill in motive. Emma stepped back. An emotion moved through her that she had not planned for, a cold, clinical clarity. The intern had orchestrated the broadcast, but had he intended to hurt her personally? Or had he been looking for views and found cruelty in what he could use? That question set her on a narrower track. She wanted specificity. They brought the evidence back to the studio. Police arrived with warrants. The intern's locker contents were logged as seized. The station's legal team prepared a statement. The broadcast team reviewed what had gone on air and what had been in the raw files. Late into the night, they reconstructed the chain. At one point, Emma and Daniel faced each other in a small back room. The room had a narrow couch and a lamp that hummed. Rain pounded the window. She folded her hands in her lap. "Why didn't you tell me about the nights at the hospital?" she asked. "Why did you leave like you did?" Her sentences were short and precise. Daniel sat opposite her, palms on his knees. "I had obligations I couldn't explain. I thought silence would spare you from my burden. I was wrong. I left you because I thought my absence would be less harmful than my explanations. I see now it did damage anyway." He held her name in each sentence. Emma leaned forward. "You could have said one sentence. I'm dealing with something." Her voice was blunt. He nodded. "I know. I'm sorry. I can show you the hospital paperwork and the photograph of the man I was helping. I can show you why I stayed away. I can try to explain, but I won't ask for forgiveness tonight. I only want you to hear the truth." His answers were small steps. They exchanged a series of short lines, 3 quick back and forths that sharpened the moment. "Daniel, did you know about the intern?" "Emma, Daniel, I had no idea. Did you ever speak to him?" "Never." "Then why would someone put your voice in a reel about my life?" Emma pressed. Daniel's eyes fell. "I can't answer that entirely. I can only be here now and hand you what's real. The rest we let the police handle." The conversation broke into silence as rain drummed harder. Marco returned and put a file on the table. "We've got enough to arrest the intern at his mother's apartment. He broke in twice to the storage locker with a copied code. He recorded room tone at your building using a rented hand unit. He used Daniel's clips because he knew they'd land. He wanted reaction." Marco's voice contained the result of labor. Em absorbed the information and felt the chapter's emotional roots settle into a narrower bed. Betrayal by someone who used Daniel's voice, and the secondary betrayal of Daniel's earlier silence. She felt anger, then a shift toward tiredness and the need to decide whether to let the police do their work or to follow the question of why Daniel had gone silent for months. The arrest happened before dawn. The intern's mother answered the door with a tea towel in her hand. She cried when the officer read the charges. The intern refused to speak. His phone records matched the relay. His thumbprints were on the rental agreement for the locker. The evidence was clean. Back at the station, Emma sat on the front steps and pulled the handset from her coat pocket. She dialed no number. She listened to the silence through the small speaker. Rain traced clean lines down the station walls. The choice she had to make felt immediate. Leave the past with the arrested intern and move on, or follow Daniel's offer of explanation further and risk reopening doors that had been pried closed. Daniel stepped out behind her. He stood under the street lamp, water running off his jacket. He looked at her without reaching. "The conversation that would decide some things had to be honest and specific, Emma," he said. "I came because I couldn't listen to my own voice used to hurt you. I didn't orchestrate it. I won't make promises I can't keep. I can only tell you what happened and show you the paperwork for the hospital visits. Then you can decide." His words were plain. Emma put her hand into her pocket and felt the worn silver ring. She rubbed the band between thumb and forefinger until the metal warmed. The final paragraph of the chapter resolves with a concrete action. She rose from the step and walked through the fog toward the van where the police had parked, coat collar up against the drizzle. Her hand closed around the handset and the ring pressed into her palm as she reached for the door handle. She did not speak a vow. She did not promise. She stepped into the van and the driver pulled away, headlights cutting the wet street. The decision to hear Daniel's explanation and to let the legal process run its course had been set into motion by the van door closing and the radio handset left quiet on her lap. Signals in the dark. Emma burst onto the radio station roof and found Daniel leaning against the glass of the broadcast window as a dark shape slid down the service stairwell. Suspicion hit her like cold metal. She could name the exact moment she began to suspect him again because she had been burned once before. She kept walking anyway, boots scuffing gravel, hand tight on the coiled handset from earlier. "Daniel," she called, voice sharp enough to cut through the night air. Daniel turned slowly. He did not reach for her. He kept his back to the skylight and let the rooftop wind lift the hem of his leather jacket. Marco's silhouette moved a half step behind him, hands raised in the placating gesture Emma knew from the station. Palms out, shoulders soft. The tension in Emma's chest shifted into a different gear, anger edged by a slow, hard fear, because the last time she had reached for a simple object at home it had shattered. She remembered the mug sliding from her fingers so clearly she could still see the chip in the rim where it hit tile. "Emma, stop!" Marco, voice low. "Get inside." His words were a physical shove. He stepped forward and took her elbow. Emma shrugged him off. She had come up the service stairwell because she had to find out where Daniel had been all those years. She had to know whether his voice on the air was a lure or the beginning of an explanation. "Why did you put him on my show?" Emma demanded. Her mouth tasted like copper. The rooftop light hummed above them. The city below moved on. The stranger in the stairwell kept pulling a jacket tighter and moved faster as if he wanted to be somewhere else. Daniel stayed where he was. "I didn't put him on," Marco replied. He glanced at Daniel and the radio producer's jaw tightened. "We scheduled him like any other guest. He called in his slot. We ran the segment. Emma, come down first. We'll talk in the control room." Marco's voice had the steady cadence he used on air, the one that smoothed edges and redirected attention. Emma's hands found the coiled handset again, and she wrapped her fingers around the cord as if holding onto a thread that might explain everything. Suspicion pushed her forward. She had felt it earlier that night when Daniel's voice filled her kitchen radio and the mug slipped out of her hand. She had felt it then as a physical burn beneath her sternum. Now suspicion moved into anger. "Daniel," she said, speaking his name like a demand. Daniel stepped toward the glass. His face looked thinner than she remembered, shadowed by the rooftop lamp. He avoided her eyes. "Emma," he said, and his voice was low on the roof, but the memory of it on the radio had been the reason she had come. "I didn't expect you to come up here." He did not offer the short sentences that had protected him in the past. He gave a single measured line. Marco put a hand on Emma's shoulder. "We need to move, okay? You shouldn't be up here." "It's late." He the practical thing. He had to steer the scene away from a public escalation. Emma listened to Marco. She listened and did not move. The stranger in the stairwell reached the roof hatch and hesitated. He touched his ear and looked at Daniel, then at Emma. For a second he was neither guest nor threat. He was simply a man caught between two glass panes and a door that would not close fast enough. Emma read the shape of him. Medium build, a knit cap, hands that were too steady to be innocent. Fear arrived, quick and small, a tightening in her throat. It hurt to step back. It hurt the rooftop was no place for an argument. "Emma," Daniel's voice dropped another register. He widened his stance as if bracing for blame. "I didn't put that caller up to anything. I don't want—" He stopped. Marco flinched as if the silence carried a live wire. Emma's anger and fear collided. She advanced a step. They moved inside because Marco pulled the hatch and practically half carried Emma down the stairwell. The rooftop air gave way to the corridor smell. Dust, old paint, a smudge of coffee. The station felt smaller from the inside, all low ceilings and fluorescent hum that pressed the world into a narrower, more intimate scale. Emma kept the handset in one hand, the cord bouncing against her wrist. In the control room, darkness hung like a dropped curtain. A single rack light blinked red. Marco flicked the overhead on and the room revealed itself in rectangles. Empty chairs, a coffee mug with a lipstick smear, a maintenance hook where someone had hung a jacket. Marco moved to the console and hit a sequence of buttons. A recorded track hummed through the headset on the desk. Daniel's voice came from the speakers, measured, calm, the same voice that had made her kitchen tile feel wrong. Emma walked straight to the desk, ignoring Marco's quick step beside her. She found the torn piece of a wedding photograph tucked under the console lip, the paper damp where something had leaked across the face of the couple. It showed Daniel and her in a frame she had lifted from 100 mornings. Daniel's arm around her waist, her hair loose over her shoulder. There was a jagged rip through Emma's face. A maintenance tag lay on top with handwriting slanted and quick. "He knows. Get out." The letters slanted toward each other like a warning. "What is that, Emma?" She put the torn photo on the console and smoothed one corner with 2 fingers. Her heartbeat did not slow. The fear that had visited on the roof widened into a raw, practical dread. Marco read the tag and swore softly. "We didn't have this before the segment. Someone put it here tonight." "I don't know who." He looked at Daniel. "Daniel, did you?" He stopped because he did not want to ask the question that would make everything public. Daniel reached and picked up the photograph in one motion that looked like careful reverence. "I didn't touch that. I swear I didn't touch that." He spoke with the measured pauses he used on air. The pauses had been his shield when things got tight between them, and Emma heard how they had served as distance then and distance now. Emma's fingers found the headset. It crackled and a recorded clip of Daniel's voice played. A line he had spoken earlier about distance and protection, words that read differently against the scribbled threat. She felt a small cold clarity. Someone had meant to make his return feel dangerous, as if his presence on the air were bait. Her suspicion bent into a new shape. Was he the target or the lure? A noise at the studio booth window made them all look up. Daniel was already moving toward the glass. He slipped inside the on-air room and pressed his palm against the laminate. The studio lights were warm. The lamp on the desk threw a ring of yellow. From outside the glass, Emma could see the microphone stand and Daniel's profile. He began to speak on the record, his words flat but steady. "Emma, I'm here because I thought it was time to explain." When the host's line cut through and the board flashed live, Marco ducked behind the console and tried to manage the feed. Emma leaned forward. Daniel explained now. Her voice came out hard and concise. Daniel looked at her through the glass. "I left because I thought distance would keep you safe." He it plainly. He did not beg. He did not soften the edges with metaphor. Emma felt anger spike again, quick and immediate. "So you vanished and left me to learn the mortgage and the night terrors and the doctor calls alone, Emma." Her sentences were short. She had to keep them that way to keep from losing control. "I thought I could fix what I couldn't say," Daniel answered. His voice on the air gave listeners a tidy line. Up close it sounded ragged. "I thought I could buy safety with space." "I misread what you needed." He watched her, and for the first time his eyes looked they might break. "Daniel, you left a ring on the counter and no note." "Emma, you walked out and pretended nothing had changed." "Who does that?" Her hands moved, making the complaint physical so she would not be swallowed by the rawness beneath it. An external sound cut across the room. A heavy metal bang from the lobby, the kind of noise a slammed door makes when someone is trying to leave fast. The studio lights flicked once and then went out. For a moment they all froze in unlit air. Emma felt the low hum of amplifier coils in her chest. The darkness felt sharp because it was sudden and specific. Footsteps approached outside the glass with a measured shoe-on-tile rhythm. A figure filled the doorway. A masked intruder framed by the doorway's rectangle, face unreadable under a plain mask. The door slammed. The studio lights remained off. The voice of the host came through the headset in a clipped whisper. "Lock the door. Lock the door." Marco's hands flew to the panel. He pushed a button and the door clicked into lock. The intruder pressed his palms against the glass as if checking whether the room contained what he sought. Emma's first reaction was not a line of thought. It was the set of her shoulders and the way her stomach clenched. She moved to step between the intruder and the console. Marco lunged and shoved a chair at the glass. "Get down!" he hissed. The intruder tore at the handle on the inside and then stepped back, pulling at his jacket. He shoved something small into his pocket and then retreated down the corridor. He left a smear on the glass where his palm had been. The smear was not decorative. It was urgent proof of proximity. "Call 911. Daniel," voice urgent in the darkness. He fumbled for the console and found his way by touch. Marco's fingers found the line and jabbed the number. Emma jammed her shoulder against the studio door, listening for any sign the intruder would return. Her fear had sharpened into a command. "Move, act, protect." She could not stand still. They heard scuffling beyond the door and then the sound of retreating steps. Marco cursed under his breath. He pointed to the floor near the console where the intruder had trodden. A small metal emblem lay on its side, half hidden beneath the chair leg. It was a ring of stamped metal with an angular symbol. A 3 Prague she had never seen before, but Daniel's face changed when he saw it. "Where did you get that?" Emma demanded. Daniel's jaw worked. He swallowed. "I saw one like it years ago, at a warehouse where I used to go with my father. I thought it meant nothing." "I was wrong." He looked at her with a desperate focus. "Emma, when I left, someone started calling. Someone left notes. Someone stood outside our building. I thought if I kept distance you would be safer. I lied to you. I didn't tell the whole truth because I thought it would spare you pain." His breathing came in pulls. "I didn't expect them to come here." The fear in his voice was a new thing. It was not the careful absence that had once hollowed their marriage. It landed on her. Emma's hands trembled. Her anger shifted into a mix of disbelief and raw concern. The emotion moved through her as physical reactions, fingers clenching, jaw tight, a backward step as if to test the solidity of the floor. She felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with public shame and everything to do with someone else deciding her risk. Marco knelt and picked up the emblem with a gloved hand from the station first aid kit drawer. He examined it under the lamp that still hummed in the corridor. "This is not local, Marco. This looks like a membership token. Someone wanted them to know he was here." He snapped a picture with his phone and sent it to the station security. His movements were brisk, designed to convert panic into procedure. "Emma, who is they?" "Daniel, who are you scared of?" Her voice was small against the fluorescent hum. Daniel gave a short, controlled exhale. "A partner I had in a business years ago. He turned violent when debts went unpaid. I thought I had cut ties, but I left something behind, documents, names. I thought I had erased everything. I didn't know he would track me to the airwaves." He ran a hand across his face, fingers rough against the 5 o'clock shadow. "I kept my ring. I kept things. I made choices that I thought were private. They weren't." He paused. "I should have told you." His confession landed with the weight of a small object on a metal table. "They waited for the police." The minutes stretched but did not evaporate. Each minute pushed tension into its own shape. The police would mean questions. Silence meant risk. Emma paced to the studio window and tapped it with a knuckle. She could see the street lamps through the opaque glass, a smear of yellow circles. The world outside the station continued with indifferent traffic, but their room had been carved into a separate thing by a locked door and an emblem on the floor. When the officers finally came, they moved in formal lines and asked the right questions. Marco gave a statement. Daniel repeated his version. Emma watched both men and tested their faces against memories she could not discard. During the interview, Daniel's voice grew steadier. He offered a detail the officers wrote down, a warehouse on the industrial side of town where Daniel had once met people about late shipments. He them the name of the partner, Vincent Cole. The officers exchanged a look and took the name. Marco stayed behind after the officers left to comb the room for fingerprints and for any sign of the intruder's path. He lifted the console cover and found a frayed cable. Its end had been worked on recently. They were not amateurs. Marco, he kept his tone factual. He wanted to convert danger into a checklist. Emma watched Daniel fold his hands over the torn photograph she'd smoothed earlier. He held the paper gently and said, "I thought I was protecting you by going away. I see now it was a selfish attempt to avoid my own failures." The admission was quiet. It was not a plea and not a demand. Emma felt a change shift beneath the immediate crisis. Suspicion thinning into something like consideration. A new event collided with the quiet. A call on Marco's line, the producer's phone lighting up with a number the station did not recognize. Marco answered. He frowned at what he heard, then flipped the phone to speaker. A man's voice spoke, rough and exact. "You made a mistake bringing him back on air." The voice cut through their careful breathing. Marco's face tightened. He handed the phone to Daniel. "You take it." He it as a command to move the risk into the hands of the person most involved. Daniel took the phone with a steadying grip. "Who is this?" he asked. "This is Cole." The voice said, "You thought you could hide in silence. You thought letting her go would keep her safe. You were wrong." The line clicked dead, no more words. The action, one short sentence and then a cut, made the room smaller. Emma's reaction was immediate. Her hands went cold. Her fear returned sharper than before and carried with it a new resolve. She would not be moved like a chess piece. The emotion shifted again, fear to a guarded readiness. She looked at Daniel and said, "We find him. Now we don't run. We do not let him decide where I go." The sentence was a choice turned concrete. Daniel's face folded with a complexity of relief and guilt. He nodded once. "Okay. We'll find him. Together." He sounded tired and the fatigue in his voice was a different thing from the distance he'd once used as armor. Marco tapped the police contact and promised cooperation. He also promised a back channel to the station owner for security upgrades. They found a small clue in the channels Marco opened. A delivery log Daniel remembered from the old warehouse, a phone number scrawled on a cigarette pack found near the stairwell. The evidence felt thin, but it was a start. Emma slid the coiled handset into her coat pocket and put the torn photo into Daniel's palm. She watched him close his fingers around the paper, saw him press the ring-shaped scar across the edge of the photograph as if acknowledging his failure. For a long moment nothing dramatic happened. They rebuilt a small order to their night calls, statements, a wait for the forensics. The fear remained, but it had narrowed into something they could name and act on. Emma found that she could breathe in the station's fluorescent light and not flinch at every noise. Her emotions moved from raw shock to guarded cooperation, then toward a fragile willingness to hear further explanation. At last, as the first weak light pried at the horizon, Emma slipped her hand into Daniel's palm and set her hidden wedding band there. Her fingers closed reflexively around the cold metal, and she felt the old shape of the ring where it had worn against her skin. She did not say anything poetic. She only placed the band and let it rest in his hand. Daniel closed his fingers, steadying it as if it were a map. Marco gathered the station's overnight notes and the emblem, photographing each item. He put the emblem into an evidence envelope and taped it shut. "We follow the lead in the morning," he said. "No public interviews, no live segments until we clear this." His tone was practical and controlling. He wanted to make sure the next move belonged to them, not to whoever had planted fear in their studio. Emma stood under the station's small practical lamp by the door, the same lamp that had thrown a warm ring across the booth earlier. She felt the night compress into a set of immediate tasks. The emblem to be traced, the warehouse to check, the unknown partner to be named and found. She had not resolved the larger question of whether she could trust Daniel again, but she had made one concrete decision. She would not let the past be the sole author of the next step. Daniel slipped the torn photograph into his jacket. He put the ring against his palm and then into his pocket next to the emblem's picture Marco had taken on his phone. He looked at Emma and said, "I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I will go with you to the warehouse if you want." His sentence asked for something that could be measured, presence. Emma considered the offer. The emotion that had started the chapter, suspicion, had moved through anger and into fear, then to a brittle trust that had to be tested by action. She met his eyes and answered with a short sentence, "Yes." Together Marco clicked off his camera and slid the evidence folder into a locked drawer. "We go at 9. We call the contacts who know the warehouse. We move as a team." He spoke like a producer sequencing logistics contingency. The plan felt like a rope thrown across uncertain water. A car alarm down the block chirped twice. The station's front door opened with the sound of a key in the lock as an early commuter stepped inside to drop a record. The world outside resumed its ordinary noise. Inside the studio, they gathered the objects of the night. The torn photo, the coiled handset, the emblem picture on Marco's phone, and the maintenance tag with its slanted warning. Emma slid the wedding band into Daniel's palm one more time to make sure he felt its weight. Then she took a breath that steadied her. She tucked the handset into her coat and clicked the station door shut behind them. Marco locked the console and held the envelope of evidence up. "We go together," he said. They walked down the street toward the waiting car under a single street lamp, the lamp misted by the night air. Emma kept her steps steady. The chapter closed on a practical, definitive movement. She and Daniel leaving the station together to follow the clue left by the attacker, the emblem now in evidence, and the torn photograph between them as both question and reason. The next step would be a warehouse address, and the first time they confronted the man who had forced Daniel to vanish. The decision to go had been made with hands and objects and a clear, concrete plan, not with a speech or a promise. The door clicked shut behind them as they stepped into the pre-dawn light. Final transmission. Emma slammed the studio door open and the on-air host cut mid-sentence. Betrayal pushed her through the corridor, sharp, hot, and plain as a bruise, and she did not stop at the lobby. Someone shouted her name. The receptionist froze with her phone half held. Emma planted both palms on the glass and barked, "Who put Daniel Reed on my show?" The words landed like a physical thing. The room rearranged itself around that demand. She came in the same coat she'd worn the night her coffee mug slipped from her hand and shattered in the kitchen. The memory of ceramic on tile from Chapter 1 echoed in the way her fingers curled. Marco met her with a careful face at the threshold and a radio handset still clenched in his other hand. "Marco, Emma, sit down." "Not here." His voice was low and he kept moving between her and the broadcast window. His tone made clear this was to contain, not to soothe. Emma answered with a laugh that had no humor. "Contain what, Marco?" "Him." She jabbed a finger toward the on-air booth where a warm lamp lit a microphone. People in the control room paused what they were doing and tilted toward the sound of her voice. The central problem was immediate and public. Daniel Reed, the man whose quiet voice had once lived in her apartment and whose absence had hollowed a year, was in the studio, and a recorded message might air in minutes. That possibility was the lightning under her skin. Marco stepped forward and guided Emma into the narrow control room, closing the door behind them. The control room smelled of warm electronics and stale coffee. The board operator had his headphones up and kept one hand on a slider. Marco shut the door and said, "We can do this quietly." "Come on." His urgency carried a different note from his habitual wryness. It was protective, practical. Emma let Marco push her to a vinyl stool by the glass window that looked onto the booth. She kept a coat on. Daniel stood on the other side of the glass, his posture careful, his hands in the pockets of his leather jacket. The light picked out the salt at his temples. He looked at Emma as if measuring whether she would break him on sight. He did not meet her eyes for long. His distance fed a new shift in Emma. Anger flared along with betrayal, then turned into a brittle, searching need to know. She had wanted answers last time. Now the answers could not be contained to private rooms. They were scheduled to broadcast. "Daniel, Emma." The name came like a shove. "Why are you here?" The words were small, but they landed. Daniel's voice over the glass was measured, thin with a reserve she remembered from dinners that had run quiet. He inhaled through his nose. "Emma, I didn't expect to see you tonight." That sentence made the air feel smaller. Emma's shoulders tightened and she rubbed her thumb against the worn silver band she kept hidden. Marco leaned in close enough that Emma could smell coffee. "There's something cued to air if we don't stop it," he told her. The board operator said nothing, but his hand hovered over a red light and a stack of recorded files. That disclosure forced a quick rethink. Betrayal bent into fear of exposure, fear that whatever Daniel had put in a recorded file would undo any control Emma had left. In the next breath, Marco moved his fingers to the console and scrolled through filer names. The operator clicked and a waveform pulsed on the screen. Emma watched the waveform like it could answer. She remembered the mug on the tile, the roof confrontation from Chapter 3, the way Daniel had leaned against the broadcast window and looked distant. Each memory was a specific image she could name: the chipped rim of a mug, the smear of rain on the roof glass, the cold angle of his jaw. Those images sat behind her sternum and sharpened the question, pressing her forward now. Daniel knocked once on the glass, a small, precise sound. "Emma," he said, and his voice carried the same low register that had stopped her on a radio once before. "Please, let me explain." He avoided the directness she wanted. He kept the kind of pauses that made sentences feel longer than they were. Emma's response an exchange of short sentences. She explained here in front of everyone. "Or stop the tape." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I can't explain everything on air," he replied. Marco glanced between them. "The public can hear whatever you decide within 2 minutes," he said. "We can pull the file, but you have to tell me now." The board operator's fingers hesitated over a key. That pressure compressed time. Emma felt anger give way to calculation. If she let the file play, the confession would be public, and the crowd outside the station, listeners, perhaps journalists, would have a version of Daniel she might not recognize. If she stopped it, she'd keep control but might never learn the whole truth. She realized she was choosing between exposure and private truth. The board operator finally spoke. "It's a recorded segment labeled Daniel Confessional. It runs 2 minutes and 20 seconds. He left it to run if I left the studio after midnight. The admission was a small, ugly twist. Daniel had prepared a confession for the air and had put agency into that recording. Emma's heart ratcheted into a new state. Suspicion pivoted into a sudden urgent need to hear whether what Daniel had to say would accuse her, excuse himself, or expose a secret. Danny looked away and pressed his palm flat on the glass as though he wanted to bridge the space. "Emma," he said, and the syllables carried a soft ache. "I thought I was protecting you. I was wrong. I can say more, but not with a microphone between us and a room full of strangers. Please." His plea was small, controlled. Marco's face shifted to the expression he'd worn when he first heard the broadcast in Chapter 1, protective, trying to pick up pieces. Emma pushed off the stool and crossed the small room toward the hallway that led to the booths. She moved with a decision-forming, anger and suspicion still at her back, but something else pulling, a need to force an answer before the tape could speak for him. She opened the hallway door and found Daniel standing in the corridor. The corridor light was practical, fluorescent. It threw a hard, honest glance at both of them. "You're not going to make this about spectacle, Daniel." "Emma." Her voice tightened. Her fingers trembled enough to betray her. Daniel took a breath and then, in a voice she knew and had loved, said, "Emma, I didn't walk away to hurt you." The line was direct. The exchange that followed became a rapid back and forth, 3 to 6 short lines that landed like blows and tests. "Daniel, you disappeared." "Emma, you left the house and stopped answering." "I thought if I left, you'd be safer." Daniel replied. "Safer from what?" Emma demanded. "From what I was becoming." "Daniel." The conversation slowed for a beat and then lurch shifted. Emma's anger moved into incredulity. Incredulity turned toward a small, cold clarity as Daniel named his fear. He explained, haltingly, that months before he left he had begun to see himself slipping in ways he couldn't control, a sharp temper at work, a night he couldn't recall, a panic he would not let her see. He had been afraid he would hurt her the way he had been hurting himself. He left to stop that pattern, he said, and he kept distance because every apology felt like a promise he could not keep. Emma's hands went to her face. She did not cry. Instead, she counted the exact sensation, her jaw clenching and of the small scar over her left eyebrow catching light. The movement was concrete. Marco's voice came from the doorway. "Daniel, is that why you left her?" Daniel nodded. The revelation reordered Emma's understanding. Betrayal remained present, but it now sat beside a different shape. Fear turned to shame inside Daniel. Loneliness traded into an admission. The change did not erase the nights Emma had spent opening their bedroom door to an empty pillow or the morning she had found the soup gone cold on the stove. It did not erase the mug that had hit tile months earlier, but explained emotion she had not been able to name. A new event intruded. The board operator's hand slipped to a key and lifted. He looked at Emma. "If you don't stop it, it plays now." The mini cliffhanger landed there. Time thinned. Emma's chest tightened in a way that registered as both a physical squeeze and a decision to be made with her feet planted on the floor. Emma took a step toward the operator, then stopped and turned back to Daniel. She'd tell me, "Daniel, did you leave because you were afraid I'd leave you? Or because you were afraid of yourself?" Her voice was small but precise. She needed that distinction. Daniel's reply came in an even, quiet voice, the sort that had always been more persuasive than bluster. "Both," he said. "I thought leaving would spare you both outcomes. I thought distance would make it harmless." This was the twist. Daniel did not frame his absence as punishment for Emma or as betrayal for another person. He had erased himself because he feared causing real harm. The twist reframed earlier memories, the night she had sat at the kitchen table, the walls of silence in their bedroom, and made them feel differently without excusing them. Emma's emotional path shifted again, from anger to a carved, exhausted clarity. She felt her hands unclench. Marco stepped closer and said, "You can let him speak for 2 minutes, or you can stop the file and take this private." "Emma, which do you want?" Marco's role was concrete. He was a shepherd for the moment, a protector weighing the trade-offs. Emma scanned the room. The board operator waited. The host, pulled from the microphone, peered in with a radio script folded in his hand. Outside, muffled studio traffic sounded like the city breathing. Emma thought of the mornings she had waited for an apology that never arrived. She thought of the roof where she had found him leaning against glass and suspected him again. She thought of the small ways she had learned to gird herself against disappointment. That memory list kept her feet planted. But she also wanted to decide the terms of that truth. She made a choice that landed between private and public. "Play it," she said. Her voice came out steady. "Let him speak. Let people hear what he wanted them to hear." It was not forgiveness. She did not say that. It was a decision to let the record stand and to hear what he had left on tape. Marco's face briefly collapsed into a mixture of worry and relief. The operator hit the key and the red light bloomed. The studio filled with the edge of recorded air. Daniel's voice unfolded through the speakers. Quieter, measured, and threaded with the same distant H that had kept her awake on countless nights. Things she had not expected. An admission of fear, recounting of small failures, a refusal to be the man who promised and broke. He named nights he had been unkind. He named the time he had not come home when she needed him, and he admitted the exact moment he decided to leave. His words were specific: the date of the quarrel over taxes, the night he slammed the car door and drove without stopping. Each detail reoriented the listener's sense of what had happened. In the control room, people listened. Marco put a hand on Emma's shoulder without pressing. Emma pressed her thumb against the silver band at her finger and felt the metal under skin. The admission on tape forced the room at large to shift. Callers began to phone in, their voices a murmur under the confession. Someone in the booth hit a delay switch and kept the broadcast within the station's control, but the confession was playing. Emma's face did not change much. She catalogued the words the way someone catalogues receipts. When the recording ended, Daniel walked away from the booth and dropped his forehead into his hands for a moment in the dim hallway. That moment felt like a physical collapse, an unspoken end to the thing he had carried. He turned to Emma and said, "I didn't expect forgiveness. I only wanted you to hear what I had built into a tape because I couldn't say it in person then." Emma stared for a beat longer than most people would. Then she said, "Why now? Why this?" The question was sharp. Daniel looked at her and answered plainly, "Because being silent built a story about me that wasn't true. I wanted to tell the version with my own words, not the version people made for me." He paused. "And because I wanted you to know I was aware. I am aware now." That choice of words, consciousness rather than excuse, moved the conversation into a new register. After the tape, listeners reacted. The studio filled with a soft chaos. Producers whispered into headsets, a host murmured into his mic, and a few callers asked for context. Marco stepped forward and said, "Emma, do you want to speak?" That question reopened the moment. For a second, the old impulse, blame, pleading, reconciliation, rose. Emma's response was not performative. She stood and walked to the small table where a single microphone sat unused, and she put down her hand with the silver band flat on the tabletop. She into the mic. "I am Emma Carter." Daniel left. What he put on tape. "I'm not here to punish him. I'm here to hold him accountable." Her words were short. Daniel shut his eyes and breathed in. The studio felt like a room where consequences had finally found a shape. She did not offer simple forgiveness. She laid out facts. The nights she had been alone, the bills she had covered, the mortgage notices she had opened at dawn. She listed dates, details, exact events that proved she had been the party left behind to carry the consequences. Her voice stayed measured and concrete. Daniel listened without interruption. When she finished, he said, "I hear you, Emma. I'm sorry for those things. I was a coward. I'm sorry." The apology was small and precise. It carried weight because it matched the specifics she'd given. In the fallout, callers offered sympathy, anger, and strange relief. Some Emma should never trust him. Others said he deserved credit for telling the truth. Marco, whose practical role had shifted into a moral one, shepherded Emma out of the studio toward the staff room where the lights were dimmer and the chairs more forgiving. You did the right thing. You for truth. You got truth and you held it in public. That matters." Emma did not respond at first. She let silence keep the space where a reply might be. Daniel found them in the staff room and asked to speak one final time quietly. Marco stepped 2 paces back and watched Emma choose whether to hear him. The decision she made now would close down what had been left open. Emma folded her hands on her knees and said, "Say it plainly. Why did you leave? Name it. Do not hide behind fear." Daniel steadied himself. "I left because I was afraid of my temper. I had a night I can't remember in full. I was terrified I'd hurt you physically or emotionally. I thought that removing myself would stop me from causing pain. I was wrong. I caused a different pain by leaving. I'm sorry." The confession was precise. It named behavior and consequence without metaphors. Marco nothing but watched Daniel with a guarded look. Emma tested the air with a small, practical question. "Did you get help? Did you see someone?" Daniel paused and answered, "I started therapy 6 months ago. I'm on a plan and I'm staying with it. I won't promise reconstruction overnight. I will promise steady work." That concrete statement, therapy, a plan, moved the arc from abstract remorse to tangible steps. The emotional shift for Emma was visible. Anger loosened into wary appraisal. Suspicion softened to a conditional hope that required verification. Outside the station, the street glowed under sodium lamps and fog collected along the curb. Emma walked to the station exit with Marco at her side. The night air hit her face with a cool sting. She stopped on the steps and opened her palm, showing the silver band to Marco without speaking. He understood and did not press her for a decision. She had chosen in the studio to let the confession air. She had heard his reason. Now she had to choose what to do with the band she had kept hidden. She threaded the ring from her finger and held it between thumb and forefinger. She considered the possibility of returning it to him at some future point. She balanced that against the months she had carried it on a finger as a private, shameful habit. She carried small, concrete proof of their life together. She set the ring on the station's low brick ledge where a streetlight pooled the metal in a warm circle. She did not announce the action. She did not make a speech. She walked away. Marco called after her softly, "Emma." She turned. His voice held concern and a hint of relief. "If you want, we can put a piece together on the show about accountability. About people who leave and then come back and do the work." Emma looked at him and then down at the ring where it sat on the ledge. "Not tonight, Marco, not now." Her refusal was a decision, not a pronouncement of defeat or triumph. Daniel watched from the doorway as Emma walked off. He did not follow. He stood in the light of the studio threshold and watched the street claim a silhouette in fog. Marco placed a hand on his shoulder in a gesture that had no easy consolation. "You did the right thing by telling the truth, Daniel." "Marco, now do the other thing. Do the steady stuff." Daniel nodded without argument. Emma walked away from the station and down the wet sidewalk. Her breath came out in small clouds. She did not feel lighter in some cinematic flush. She felt calibrated like a tool reset to a new, usable state. She had forced answers, heard them, and acted on them with physical choices. She had let the confession be public, she had demanded specifics, and she had removed the ring from her finger and left it where the radio's light could warm the metal. That was her concrete resolution. At the corner, a taxi stopped and the driver called out. She waved him off. She kept walking until the city swallowed the station's neon and noise. When she reached the block where she lived, she paused and took the key from her bag with fingers that no longer trembled the way they had at the control room door. She opened her apartment and turned on the kitchen light. The mug she had once let fall sat clean in the cabinet. She set a kettle on the stove and filled it, measuring 2 exact scoops of tea. The domestic action felt like a small, steady ritual that would carry her through the next days. She placed the tea cup on the table and sat. The chest ache of betrayal remained as a fact, but it no longer dictated every small move. She had heard the truth in a room of strangers and had named the facts herself. She had watched Daniel admit his motives and name his work. She had decided to leave the silver band on a station ledge. That was an action with meaning, not a slogan. Her choice had weight because it was specific. She had not forgiven by an instant, but she had refused to let silence shape the narrative any further. In the pre-dawn hush, a neighbor knocked and asked if she wanted coffee. Emma declined. She read a text from Marco. "Call when you want." She typed back 3 words and hit send. "I'm okay." It was not a promise. It was a precise, honest accounting. She closed the door to her apartment and sat with the kettle's soft hiss. The story had an end in the station that night. The confession, the public airing, the private admissions, and a small decision at the door. The last act was not melodrama. It was a tight, physical motion that changed how she carried what had come before. She leaned back and let the sound of boiling water be the only thing she counted for a minute. The chapter closed not on a grand revelation but on a clear situational beat. Emma set her tea down and, with a single deliberate motion, slid her phone into the drawer and turned the key in the lock. The door clicked shut.